always uses concept of they. Who are they? And you'll hear that term being used quite often in this realm of people wanting to understand the greater knowledge and concepts of life. Who are they? What is they? And the answer to that is that when we refer to they, we're referring to quite a large complex, quite a large structure, which spans quite a few different dimensional levels, even, and levels within 2 dimensions. So if you want to look at the control structure on this planet, it basically goes like this. You have the governmental structure, which is directly above the masses. And beyond that, you've got an enormous structure. I mean, presidents and politicians and all that, they really are at the very, very bottom of all of that. They're just puppets. That's all they are. No one actually votes anybody in. You know, I used to be a hardware engineer, and our computers were looking after the Electoral Commission a long, long time ago, back in the late 70s and early 80s in Australia. You know, and I was in there, and I understand that only a handful of people, 2, maybe 3 maximum, would get access to the programs in those computers. And it doesn't take much for code to be changed. So when you're voting for one party, after every 10 votes, you can knock one over to the other party, or every 8 votes. No one would ever know you did it. It's not hard to do, you know? And when you understand things from that level, then you realise that you can get a machine to say whatever you want it to say. And that there's no such thing as democracy. No one ever gets voted into position. Everybody gets appointed. And they're groomed from a very young age to actually fulfil that role. And they have usually, you know, half a dozen options. In case one doesn't work out, they've got somebody else that can fulfil that role. And if that doesn't work out, then they'll have someone else that fulfills that role. So they've always got plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G up their sleeve, making sure that they've got all their bases covered so their agenda can eventually be fulfilled. So there is no such thing as democracy. That's an illusion. And whenever you vote, and you vote for an election, that's an illusion. No one actually votes for anyone to come into power. Everything is by design, and people get appointed into position. That's fact, that's reality. So the structure of they goes up quite high. So beyond the US president, you have 38 levels of top secrecy. So who are all these people? And that's just within the US structure. What about all the other structures? What about the banking systems? Because that's separate from the 38 levels of top secrecy that I talked about for the US president. So what about the banking structures now? And what is the banking structure? The banking structure is a mechanical tool that is used to control the human race via what we call an economic collective. And economic collectives come in many, many different forms. Credit system can be used. So it doesn't matter if they want to wipe out one sort of currency and introduce some other new, you know, fancy version of currency, you're still going to be inside an economic collective. It doesn't matter if you get introduced into a galactic community and they come up with this really wonderful technology and you are now introduced into the way they structure their societies and they use some sort of credit system and a reward system. It doesn't matter, it's still an economic collective. You can dress it up however you like. So the structure of they goes really high up, goes through the banking system, goes through the cartels of all the monetary cartels, the CEOs and the corporate structures and the infrastructure. It's massive. With all the technologies that have been imposed on the human race, this is a colossal system, the whole thing. It's heavily compartmentalised. People that sit at the top of one structure think that they're at the top of it all, and they're not. They're just at the top of a compartment which controls one hierarchical structure. And they have no clue that right next to them is another structure that is equal, if not greater than what theirs is. But they can't see that. And then from there it goes into these really dark secret organisations, and I'm not talking about the Freemasons, because there is a high level of control in the Freemasons, but that's baby levels compared to the real dark ones. You see, even when you go through Bilderbergs and all that, all the names you hear in the public arena, They are the ones that they want you to know about. That's why the names are out. The lists of the people that are in those organisations and meetings are simply people who have big egos and are playing the role of the public facade. Some of them don't realise they're playing the role, some of them do realise they're playing the role. So there's organisations that exist behind the scenes that you don't know the names of. There are wealthy families, not talking Rothschilds, Rockefellers and all that, no. The names that you don't know about. And I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to do that. But there's names of families that you don't know about that are hidden behind the scenes, and they are the real string pullers behind the scenes. Let me give it to you this way. Let me give you an example of one of the main structures on our planet. You think that the US controls the planet in so many ways, and it does, in a way it does. But don't think for a minute that the head of control, the head of the snake, is in America. It's not. It's like a mafia setup. It's like this. You've got the big boss, and he creates a structure. So he has his musclemen that go out and do the heavy work. Then he has like a group of interface people, be it to do with money laundering, be it to do with corporate consulting, be it to do with insurances, be it to do whatever structure that entity, that person requires, be it a person or an entity. This is how they function. So what they do is they create layers, a buffering system. So what they want to do is insulate themselves as much as they possibly can from the interactive process that takes place in the public arena. So think of America as the muscle man. Then think of Europe as the interface. So a lot of people think head of operations is actually in Europe, and it's not. Head of operations is in Australia and New Zealand. That's where the real wealth and the real power structure emanates from on this planet. On an earthly level. Have you ever wondered about the Wizard of Oz? The Wizard of Oz. You ever wondered about that? Where does the wizard live? In Aussie. It's not a joke, I'm not making that up. It's not just a biplane on the word. I come from the land of Oz. The wizard lives in the land of Oz. You've got to know how to read the code. Pine Gap is the most powerful underground base on the planet. It makes Area 51 look like a little baby. Don't be fooled. You see, Australian is an island fortress. The power, look, what they've done to the Australian public is amazing. We have become really apathetic. It's apathy that rules Australia. But don't get me wrong, there's a level of Australians that, you know what amazed people when we have these disasters in Australia? This is what I admire about Australian people. When we have these disasters, everyone hooks in. You don't get the looting and you don't get that happening in Australia. Everybody hooks in. You know, when we saw that cyclone Katrina down there that happened down in New Orleans, the looting and the violence and people want to take advantage of people, that was really sad. That side of it was really sad. It was quite, it wasn't the majority, but it was sad. I felt sad in that moment. But you don't get that in Australia. You might get the odd one, but it's really, really, you just don't see any significant numbers of it happening. Most Australians are going to hook in, they'll stand shoulder to shoulder and they help each other out. So, but there's this level of apathy in Australia. She'll be right, mate. You know? Let's just watch the footy, watch the cricket, drink our beer and don't worry about too much. And I'm sure you've got that in your cultures too. But the way they've insulated the masses from the controlling authorities in Australia is amazing. Like, let me give you an example. The area around Area 52, which is what we call Pine Gap, is so big, it's about twice the size of Texas. That's been sectioned off and no one's allowed to go inside of. Do you get a feel for what I'm talking about now? It's enormous. Australia's an island fortress, and the most powerful and the most wealthy families that do all the string pulling behind the scenes live there. And a lot of the people who are very wealthy and powerful in areas like the US and Europe are, interestingly enough, in the process of purchasing in the last 5 years properties in Australia, because they feel that's the safest place to be. And there's underground tunnel networks in Australia that are so big, like the distance from Pine Gap to our capital, Canberra, is around 2,000 to 2,500 kilometres. And they have an underground tunnel that links Pine Gap to our Parliament House in Canberra. That's huge. And these are high-speed, magnetically run trains with no surface touch, doesn't touch anything. It just hovers in the air and goes like a bullet through that tunnel. There's a lot more going on with Australia than people realise. But don't underestimate down under and what it's capable of and the role that it's playing. And then you go to these secret structures, and I'm not talking just skull and bones and all those societies that you know of. There are a whole plethora of individual little units in this compartmentalised system, literally hundreds of them. All different names no one knows about. And then from there, that level is what starts to interface with an off-world hierarchy. That's the level that interfaces with an off-world cabal. That's where that begins. Because they do their secret little ceremonies, and during those ceremonies, they have these entities that come and pay them a visit. And every time they do these ceremonies, these other off-world entities and interdimensional beings get their tentacles deeper into people. Every time they perform a ritual, and there's a ritual that I haven't spoken of yet, which I will in a moment. So each time you perform these rituals, you get these energies that get their tentacles deeper into you. That's why I'm not into rituals. And then from there, it goes, physically it goes to the moon. And from the moon, it goes to Mars. This is one arm, one branch. And from the Mars, it goes to the Orion Nordics. And there's a few other little interfaces in between, but that's the main arm. And there's another, some more sophisticated version that goes to Saturn and then comes to the Earth. And the interesting thing about Saturn, which I'll talk about now, the interesting thing about this fella is understanding the age-old battle that's going on, because it's every single planet, you know, we have 12 strands of DNA, right? So you've got to understand that that's a fractal structure that the Creator's using. It's fractals of 12. Each strand of DNA represents an archetypal personality of the Creator. And then we have the 12 planets in our solar system. And that's why you have the 12 apostles. And it's a link to the carbon structure as well. So the whole thing is linked, and it's all got to do with carbons 12, and it completes the whole infrastructure from physical life to spiritual life to cosmic life. Now the rings of Saturn are really important, because the role that Saturn is playing as an archetype has to do with the age-old battle of the personality of the consciousness that is that planet, and the jealousy that it has to do with the sun, who is the solar system. Those two guys have a bit of a power struggle going on. And with the sun taking a step back for a very, very long period of time and allowing things to unfold, allowing darkness to come into its body, embodiment of the solar system, Saturn started playing a more prominent role. It's the local headquarters of what you would call the Great White Brotherhood. Again, remember this energy here, the positive side of the scales only, known as the Great White Brotherhood. And what they're doing, you'll notice there's a lot of talk about the rings of Saturn at the moment. And what they're doing is, because if you really look at the rings, you can see that they're manufactured. I mean, it's pretty obvious. And what they're doing is the rings are being used to calibrate the energetic patterns in our solar system, because the energies of Saturn and the beings that are working with the Saturn energy want to take control of the solar system away from the sun. It's a power struggle. And they're using the rings as toning rings. It's got to do with harmonics. And the way the harmonics affects the whole solar system, and especially life here on Earth. It's a very sophisticated tool that they're using with the toning rings. So it's a sophisticated technology. They know exactly what substance to put in the rings, to what degree, how to space them, and it's kind of like this. And I find it fascinating that science actually calls them the A, B, C, D, E, F, and G ring. Anyone who understands music will understand what I just said. So you've got to understand that there's so much more going on with this, with Saturn and the role that Saturn's playing. It's a very sophisticated level of control, high-end spiritual level. Self-righteous, white positive, love and light, judgmental energy. Will sell love and light for all it's worth. That's what they're going to use. That's what they're using against the human race. Is our yearning for love, because we've been deprived, we've been plunged into such a deep negative charge for so long, and that's how Saturn is being used against the human race. Now, I talked about rituals before. I want to get on this subject again. It's pretty heavy.